A police captain thought he could destroy an innocent black man's life just to get attention online, but he had no idea that the man he tried to frame was actually an undercover FBI agent. The city was restless that evening, glowing with the neon signs of small shops, the endless rush of traffic, and the constant chatter of people trying to get through another day. In the middle of all this noise, Police Captain Raymond Carter sat in his patrol SUV, scrolling on his phone. He wasn't looking at reports or police data. Instead, he was refreshing his social media feed, watching the number of likes on his latest video rise slowly, but not fast enough for his taste. For months, he had been using his badge less as a tool for justice and more as a way to build an online persona. In his mind, he wasn't just a police officer, he was a star, and the city was his stage. Carter had grown addicted to the thrill of online attention. Every video of him, catching a suspect, every photo of him standing tall in uniform, every fake dramatic post about his bravery made him feel powerful. But the attention never lasted. The likes would rise for a day, then fade. The comments would cheer him on, then vanish into silence. Carter craved more. He needed something bigger, something that would shock people, something that would make him go viral. He didn't want justice, he wanted fame, and he was willing to bend the truth to get it. That night, as the streets buzzed with energy, Carter's eyes searched for a target. He needed someone who looked suspicious, someone the crowd would believe was guilty. That was when he spotted him, a young black man walking home from work, carrying nothing but a backpack and the weight of his day. His clothes were neat but simple, his steps calm, his eyes tired from long hours. He was minding his own business, blending into the busy city, but for Carter, he was the perfect opportunity. Carter's mind started racing with a plan. This is it, he thought. This is the guy. He looks like someone the crowd will believe is up to no good. All I have to do is eat a story, make it look real, and the cameras will love it. In Carter's twisted logic, it didn't matter that the man was innocent. What mattered was the drama, the performance, the applause. He gripped his phone tightly, already imagining the headlines, Captain Carter saves the day, again. He turned on his siren and pulled his SUV to the side of the street, cutting off the young man's path. People around stopped and stared, curious about what was happening. Carter stepped out of the vehicle with his chest puffed out, his badge shining under the streetlights. "Hey, you," he barked, pointing at the young man. "Stop right there." The man froze, confused but respectful. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked, his voice calm but cautious. Carter smirked, already raising his voice so the crowd could hear. "You match the description of a suspect we've been looking for," he announced loudly, though no such suspect existed. "You're under investigation for theft in this area." His tone was sharp, his words dripping with authority. The young man blinked in disbelief. "Theft? I just came from work. I don't even know what you're talking about." But Carter wasn't listening. He didn't need facts. He needed drama. He stepped closer, circling the man like a predator. "Don't play games with me," he growled, loud enough for onlookers to record on their phones. "We've got witnesses, we've got reports, and you're not walking away from this." A small crowd gathered, whispering among themselves. Some pulled out their phones, ready to film what looked like another big arrest. Carter noticed the cameras and felt a rush of excitement. This was exactly what he wanted, an audience. He tightened his grip on the handcuffs hanging from his belt, already imagining the moment he would snap them shut and pose like a hero. The young man took a slow breath, trying to stay calm. "Officer, you've made a mistake. Please, just check my ID. Call my workplace. I didn't do anything." His voice was steady, but his eyes showed a flicker of fear. Carter, however, was deaf to reason. He had already built his story in his head, and no amount of truth could shake it. He waved dismissively at the man's words and turned toward the crowd, raising his voice again. "This is what happens when you think you can get away with crime," he declared, performing for the cameras. "Not on my watch." The young man clenched his fists at his sides, resisting the urge to argue further. He knew too well how quickly things could spiral when a black man raised his voice to a white police captain. He chose silence, but his silence only fueled Carter's performance. Carter reached for the handcuffs and stepped forward with a grin that was half victory, half hunger for applause. "You're under arrest," he announced dramatically, as if delivering the final line of a play. The crowd gasped. Some shook their heads in pity for the young man, while others muttered words of approval for the captain's bravery. Phones recorded every second, capturing Carter's staged moment of glory. What no one in the crowd knew, what Carter himself had no clue about, was that this arrest was not the beginning of his rise to fame, it was the beginning of his downfall. The man he was framing was not the helpless target Carter imagined. Behind those calm eyes and steady words was Psalm. One far more powerful, someone who had been trained to remain patient, someone who knew exactly how to expose corruption. But for now, in that tense moment on the city street, the young black man allowed the scene to play out. He let Carter believe he was winning, let the cameras roll, let the performance continue. Because sometimes, the best way to catch a liar is to let him speak louder, act bolder, and dig his own grave, one fake word at a time. And that is exactly what Captain Carter was doing. The siren's echo still rang in the air as Captain Carter tightened his grip on the handcuffs. The crowd had grown larger now, pedestrians stopped on sidewalks, drivers leaned out of car windows, and cell phones lit up the street like tiny spotlights. For Carter, this was the perfect stage. His heart raced with excitement, not because he had caught a dangerous criminal, but because he could already see the number of likes, shares, and views exploding once this video hit the internet. Every second of his act was fuel for the attention he craved. The young black man, however, stood quietly, his backpack still slung over one shoulder. His face was calm but guarded. He had been in situations before where silence was safer than words, and this felt like one of those moments. He knew protesting too much could be twisted into resisting arrest, and the last thing he wanted was to give Carter any excuse to escalate. Still, deep inside, there was a fire of frustration and disbelief. He had done nothing wrong, yet here he was being paraded like a criminal for strangers' entertainment. Carter's voice boomed again, sharp and theatrical. "Ladies and gentlemen, you're looking at a suspect who thought he could get away with stealing from hard-working people in this neighborhood." His words dripped with false certainty, each sentence crafted not for truth but for effect. He yanked the man's backpack off his shoulder and dropped it to the ground as if it were evidence. He didn't bother to check what was inside, the performance mattered more than the facts. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some people muttered their doubts, "He doesn't look like a thief," but most just watched, too used to scenes like this, too afraid to step in. A young woman on the sidewalk whispered to her friend, "Should we record this?" Her friend shook her head, already holding her phone up high. "Everyone is record. This." The man raised his eyes to Carter, his tone steady but edged with quiet strength. "You are making a mistake. I have no connection to any theft. You need to check your information before you accuse me." Carter chuckled, loud and mocking, so the crowd could hear. "Oh, you're a smooth talker, aren't you? That's what criminals always say." He grabbed the man's wrists roughly and forced his arms behind his back. The cold snap of metal echoed as the cuffs locked in place. Carter tilted his chin upward, scanning the crowd as if expecting applause. A couple of onlookers nodded approvingly, but others looked uncomfortable. One man muttered, "This doesn't feel right." Still, Carter pushed forward, unwilling to let doubt spoil his act. He leaned close to the man's ear and whispered so only he could hear, "Keep talking, and I'll make sure you regret it." Then, turning back to the crowd, he lifted his voice again. "This is how justice works, folks. No matter how clever you think you are, the law will always catch up." The young man said nothing. His breathing was steady, his posture upright, his silence powerful. He understood something Carter didn't. Real strength doesn't come from shouting, it comes from patience. And in that moment, patience was his greatest weapon. Two uniformed officers who had arrived late to the scene watched uneasily. They had seen Carter pull stunts before, bending rules to make himself look good, but this felt different. One officer glanced at the other, whispering, "Do you think this guy actually matches a suspect?" The other shrugged nervously. Carter said he does. What are we supposed to do? Their hesitation hung heavy in the air, but neither spoke up. Fear of crossing their captain was stronger than their duty to question him. As Carter shoved the man toward his SUV, the crowd followed, murmuring. A teenage boy shouted, he didn't do anything, but his voice was drowned out by the roar of engines and chatter. Carter smirked, pretending not to hear. He opened the back door and pushed the man inside, slamming it shut with exaggerated force. Cameras caught every move. Before climbing into the driver's seat, Carter turned one last time to face the crowd. He held up the backpack like a trophy. Evidence, he announced, even though he hadn't even looked inside. The phone's recording tilted upward, capturing his self-satisfied grin. Carter imagined the headlines already. Captain Carter takes another criminal off the streets. He could almost feel the rush of new followers, the stream of congratulatory comments, the validation he so desperately needed. Inside the car, the young man sat quietly, his eyes fixed on the reflection of the crowd in the glass. He wasn't angry, anger wasted energy. Instead, he was calculating, watching, memorizing every detail. The way Carter exaggerated his voice. The way the officers hesitated but stayed silent. The way the crowd blindly accepted what was in front of them without questioning. Every piece of the puzzle was falling into place. Carter started the engine, feeling untouchable. To him, this was victory. He had humiliated another black man, played the hero, and fed his hunger for attention. But what he didn't realize was that his victory was hollow. In his arrogance, he had just handcuffed the very person who had the power to expose every lie he had ever told. As the SUV pulled away, the murmurs of the crowd faded into the background. The young man shifted slightly in his seat, the cold metal biting into his wrists. He knew this wasn't the end of the story, it was just the beginning. Carter thought he was taking his suspect to the station, but in reality, he was diving straight into his own downfall. The city lights blurred past the windows, glowing like silent witnesses. Carter gripped the wheel with one hand, raising his phone with the other to record himself giving a smug speech about justice served. The man beside him watched quietly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. He knew something Carter didn't, the real justice hadn't even started yet. And soon, the world would see the difference between a performance and the truth. The heavy steel doors of the police station swung open with a loud creak as Captain Carter marched inside, pulling his suspect along like a prize catch. The other officers at the front desk looked up in surprise, then quickly masked their expressions with forced smiles. They had seen Carter drag people in before, sometimes guilty, sometimes not, but tonight his confidence seemed louder than usual. He strutted through the lobby, puffing his chest, his voice booming so everyone could hear. Got him. Another thief off the streets. This one thought he was slick, but not on my watch. He spoke with the swagger of a man who believed his own lies. He didn't just want the approval of the crowd outside, he wanted the admiration of his colleagues too. Carter fed on validation the way a starving man feeds on bread. Every nod, every compliment, every pat on the back made him feel untouchable. He shoved the young black man into a chair and slapped a file onto the desk, though the file was empty. It was all for show. The man sat quietly, hands still cuffed behind his back, his posture calm, his gaze steady. He didn't fidget or beg. He didn't shout or cry. His silence made Carter uneasy, though he would never admit it. "Don't get too comfortable," Carter sneered, circling him like a vulture. "You're about to spend a long night answering questions you don't want to answer." The man raised his eyes slowly, his voice smooth, deep, and steady. "Captain Carter, do you even know what you're doing?" The words hit Carter like a jab, but he brushed them off with a laugh. "What I'm doing," he said, puffing up his chest again, "is protecting this city. People like you think you can walk around breaking the law, but I make sure justice is served." He turned toward the watching officers, raising his voice. "This man was caught red-handed. He thinks he's smarter than us, but I showed him who's in charge." A few officers exchanged glances. Something about this didn't sit right, but no one dared to speak. Carter was their captain, and challenging him could mean trouble for their careers. Still, the unease in the room grew heavier with each exaggerated word. The man leaned back in the chair, his cuffed hands resting calmly against the wood. His eyes were sharp now, focused directly on Carter. "You talk about justice," he said quietly, "but everything you just did out there was a performance. You arrested me without a warrant. You accused me without evidence. You humiliated me in front of strangers for your own ego." Carter slammed his palm on the desk, trying to drown out the truth with noise. "You watch your mouth. You don't get to lecture me. You're just another criminal trying to play innocent." His voice shook slightly, though he covered it with anger. The man tilted his head, studying Carter with a calmness that cut deeper than rage ever could. Then, with deliberate slowness, he shifted his shoulders and spoke words that would change everything. "I am not just some random man you picked off the street. I'm not a thief, and I'm not your pawn. I am a federal agent, working undercover for the FBI." The room froze. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every officer standing nearby stiffened, their eyes darting between Carter and the man in the chair. Carter blinked, stunned, then forced out a laugh. "Yeah, right. Do you think I'm stupid? That's the oldest trick in the book. Everyone claims to be someone important when they get caught." The man's lips curled into the faintest smile. "You want proof?" He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice to a controlled calm. "Check the inner pocket of my jacket. There's a badge. You can confirm it with headquarters in less than a minute." For the first time, Carter hesitated. He glanced at the officers around him, but no one moved. The silence pressed on him like a weight. Finally, with a scoff meant to hide his nerves, Carter reached into the man's jacket pocket. His fingers brushed against a smooth leather case. Slowly, he pulled it out and flipped it open. The badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Alongside it was an official ID with the man's photograph and credentials. There was no denying it. The suspect Carter had paraded like a trophy was, in fact, an undercover FBI agent. A chill rippled through the room. One officer whispered under his breath, "Oh my God." Another shifted uncomfortably, stepping back as if the truth itself were dangerous. Carter's face drained of color. His jaw tightened, his hands trembled, but he tried to keep up the act. This has to be fake. There's no way." He tossed the badge onto the desk, but the weight of it seemed to echo louder than his denial. The man's eyes never left his. "It's not fake, Captain. I've been investigating corruption in this department for months. And tonight, you handed me more evidence than I could have asked for. Every word you shouted, every threat you made, every false accusation, it's all documented." Carter felt his stomach twist. His mind raced, searching for a way out, but every path led back to the same crushing truth. He had walked straight into a trap of his own making. The man he thought was his victim was the very person with the power to bring him down. The agent leaned back again, his calmness unshaken. "Do you understand what this means, Captain? You didn't just embarrass yourself. You exposed your abuse of power in front of witnesses, cameras, and your own officers. And now, the FBI knows everything. The silence in the station was deafening. Officers who once looked at Carter with respect now looked at him with fear, or worse, disappointment. He felt their eyes like knives in his back. For the first time in years, Carter wasn't the one in control. The agent's voice cut through the tension like steel. Justice isn't a show. It isn't likes and followers. It's the truth. And tonight, the truth is standing right in front of you. Carter swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. He had spent his career building an image of strength, but now, under the unblinking stare of the undercover FBI agent, he had never felt weaker. And in that moment, Captain Carter finally realized, his empire of lies was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The air inside the station grew heavier by the second. The badge on the desk gleamed under the harsh lights, as if mocking Captain Carter with every flicker. His once confident smirk was gone, replaced by the stiff expression of a man whose world was cracking open. The officers who had once looked to him for leadership now looked at the FBI agent with wide eyes, whispering among themselves. For the first time in years, Carter felt small, trapped, and cornered. He tried to steady his breathing, but the walls seemed to close in tighter with every passing second. The agent, still seated calmly in the chair with his hands cuffed, spoke with quiet authority. I told you, Captain, you've made the biggest mistake of your career tonight. You think you were putting on a show for the public, but the only one exposed is you. Everything you've done has been documented, every unlawful arrest, every abuse of power, every word you barked outside. His voice was steady, but there was an edge of steel behind it that made Carter's skin crawl. Shut up, Carter snapped, his voice rising, though it sounded weaker now, less convincing. He turned toward the watching officers, desperate to regain control. Don't listen to him. This is all a trick. He's lying to protect himself. But no one moved. No one nodded in agreement. The silence of his colleagues told him the truth he didn't want to face, his authority was slipping through his fingers. The agent leaned forward, his calmness unshaken. You want proof? Check the recording devices. Check the cameras outside. Better yet, check the files I've already submitted to federal headquarters. They've been tracking your behavior for weeks. Tonight was just the final piece. Carter's heart pounded in his chest. He glanced at the security cameras mounted in the corners of the room, suddenly aware that every move he made was being captured, possibly already uploaded to evidence servers beyond his reach. Panic gripped him, but he forced out a laugh that came out shaky. You think anyone's going to believe you over me? I've served this city for years. I have a spotless record. People trust me. The agent's eyes narrowed, sharp and unforgiving. Do they? Or have you just been hiding behind your badge and your followers online? Tell me, Captain, how many innocent men did you put in cuffs for your own fame? How many times did you bend the truth to get applause? You thought no one was watching, but the FBI always watches. The room buzzed with quiet tension. A few officers shifted uncomfortably, guilt flashing across their faces. They had seen Carter bend rules, but none had dared speak up. Now, with the truth exposed, they wondered if their silence had made them accomplices. Carter felt their doubt like a knife in his back. I should have known, the agent continued, his voice sharp as a blade. You weren't after justice, you were after views. You thought the badge made you untouchable. But tonight, the badge won't protect you. It will bury you. Carter's fists clenched at his sides. He wanted to shout, to silence the man, but he couldn't find the words. His voice, once his greatest weapon, failed him. Every excuse sounded hollow in his mind before he could speak it. The room no longer belonged to him, it belonged to the agent. The agent shifted in his chair, his expression steady, his presence commanding. Here's what's going to happen, Captain. Federal officers are on their way right now. They'll walk through those doors any minute. And when they do, you won't be the one giving orders, you'll be the one in cuffs." Carter froze. His body stiffened, his mind racing. The idea of being dragged out in front of his own officers, humiliated the way he had humiliated so many others, made his stomach twist with dread. His pride screamed at him to fight back, but his fear whispered the truth: he was finished. One of the younger officers finally spoke, his voice hesitant but firm. "Captain, is it true? Have you been doing this for attention?" His question broke the silence like glass shattering. Other officers turned toward Carter, waiting for his answer, their loyalty shaken. Carter's lips parted, but no words came out. His throat felt dry, his mind blank. He could only stare at the badge still resting on the desk, its golden seal burning into his vision. That silence was louder than any confession. The agent didn't need to press further. He leaned back in his chair, his composure unbroken. "You see, Captain, the tables have turned. Tonight you thought you'd make a fool of me in front of the world. But in the end, you made a fool of yourself. You staged your performance, and now the truth has taken the stage. And this time, the whole world will be watching, not cheering you, but condemning you." Carter's chest heaved, his breath shallow. He glanced at the officers again, searching desperately for an ally, but saw only disappointment. They weren't standing with him anymore, they were standing against him. Just then, the distant sound of heavy boots echoed down the hallway. The station doors opened, and a team of federal agents in dark jackets stepped inside, their faces stern, their movements precise. The room snapped to attention. Carter's heart dropped into his stomach. This was it. The FBI agent who had been seated finally stood, straightening his jacket, his presence commanding the room. He turned to the federal team and nodded. "This is the man. Captain Raymond Carter. Corruption, abuse. E of power, falsifying arrests, misconduct. He's yours now." Carter stumbled backward, his hands shaking. "Wait, this can't be happening." His voice cracked, desperation leaking into every word. But the federal officers moved forward without hesitation. In one swift motion, Carter's own wrists were yanked behind his back, and the cuffs clicked shut with a cold finality. The same sound he had used so many times to silence others now sealed his fate. The once proud captain was no longer the enforcer, he was the prisoner. The same crowd of officers who once feared him now watched in silence as his mask of power crumbled. The undercover agent stepped closer, his eyes locked on Carter's. His voice was calm but heavy with finality. "This is what justice looks like, Captain. Not the fake kind you staged for cameras. The real kind. The kind that holds people like you accountable." As Carter was led away, the weight of his downfall pressed harder than the steel on his wrists. For years, he had controlled the narrative, twisting stories to make himself the hero. But tonight, the truth had rewritten the story. He wasn't the hero anymore, he was the cautionary tale. And for the first time in his life, Carter had no audience to cheer him. Only witnesses to his fall. The clatter of Captain Carter's handcuffs echoed through the station like a drumbeat of justice. Every officer who had once followed his orders now stood frozen, watching as the man they had feared for years was led away in disgrace. The federal agents tightened their grip on his arms, forcing him forward, while the undercover FBI agent walked calmly beside them, his presence commanding and unshakable. For Carter, the station that had once been his kingdom now felt like a prison. The walls no longer whispered respect, they shouted betrayal. As the group moved through the lobby, the younger officers exchanged uneasy glances. Some looked ashamed, others relieved. The truth was out now, and though it shattered the illusion they had lived under, it also lifted a weight from their shoulders. No longer would they be forced to watch silently as Carter bent the rules and abused his power for personal gain. Justice had stepped into the room, and it was unstoppable. Outside the station, word had already spread. The crowd that had once cheered Carter's arrest of the young man was still gathered, waiting for updates. When the doors swung open, gasps rippled through the air. Instead of seeing the black man in chains, they saw Captain Carter himself, his wrists bound behind his back, his head lowered in shame. The irony was undeniable. The very man who had humiliated an innocent person for views was now being paraded in the same way. But this time, it wasn't for show. It was real. Murmurs swept through the crowd. "Wait, isn't that the captain?" someone whispered. "Why is he in cuffs?" Another voice rose louder. "He framed that man. He's the criminal." Phones shot up again, recording the shocking reversal. Within seconds, the truth began to spread faster than Carter's lies ever had. Social media feeds lit up with headlines: "Corrupt Captain Exposed by Undercover FBI Agent." The undercover agent stepped forward, his voice clear and steady as he addressed the people. "What you saw earlier was not justice. It was a performance. Captain Carter abused his badge, his authority, and his position to stage false arrests for fame. But tonight, the truth has caught up with him. He will answer for every life he tried to ruin." His words rolled through the crowd like thunder, breaking the last remnants of Carter's false image. Carter tried to speak, his voice desperate, cracking under the weight of his downfall. "This is a mistake. I was protecting you. I was," but his words were drowned out by jeers from the crowd. They no longer saw him as a hero. They saw him for what he truly was, a fraud. His pleas, once powerful enough to command a room, now fell flat against the roar of the people demanding accountability. The FBI agents pushed him into a waiting vehicle, slamming the door shut behind him. The sound was final, like a curtain falling on the last act of a play. Carter slumped in the seat, staring blankly out the window as the car pulled away. His career, his reputation, and his freedom, all gone in a single night. The badge he had worshipped as his ticket to glory was now the very evidence that would seal his fate in court. Back on the station steps, the undercover agent stood tall, the cuffs no longer on his wrists but in his hands, a silent symbol of the tables having turned. He looked out at the crowd, his expression calm yet resolute. "Justice," he said simply, "is not a game. It is not for likes or applause. It is for the truth. And the truth will always win." The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices rising in unison. For the first time in a long while, they felt the weight of real justice. Strangers hugged, children clapped, and the sound of applause filled the night air. The young man, once treated as a suspect, was now seen as the hero who had ended corruption at its root. Inside the station, officers gathered, still processing what had unfolded. Some felt shame for not speaking sooner. Others felt pride that justice had finally caught up to their corrupt leader. But all of them knew the department would never be the same again. The fear Carter had instilled in them had vanished, replaced by the reminder that even those in power were not above the law. Days later, headlines across the nation covered the story. Police captain arrested in FBI sting. Officer who faked arrests for social media fame exposed. Videos of Carter's downfall went viral, not as his victory but as his humiliation. The internet, which he had once worshipped, now turned on him completely. His followers disappeared, his supporters abandoned him, and his name became a warning: abuse power, and you will be caught. Meanwhile, the undercover agent returned to his work quietly, avoiding the spotlight. He had not sought fame, only justice. And justice had been delivered. His role was not to bask in the applause but to ensure that the truth continued to shine through the darkness of corruption. Still, in the hearts of the people who had witnessed the events that night, he would always be remembered as the man who stood calm in the face of lies and brought the truth crashing down like a hammer. As for Captain Carter, he sat in a federal prison cell awaiting trial. The walls were plain, the room silent, and there were no cameras to capture him. For the first time, he had no stage, no audience, and no applause. He was forced to face the reality he had spent years running from. Without lies, without followers, without his badge, he was nothing. And nothing was all he had left. Justice had been delivered, not in the way Carter once defined it, but in the way it was meant to be, fair, true, and unshakable. The city breathed easier knowing that corruption had been torn down, and the people had witnessed with their own eyes that no one, no matter how powerful, was above accountability. The story closed not with Carter's false performance, but with the undeniable truth: real justice doesn't need a stage. It stands on its own. And on that night, it stood taller than ever.